Hello, welcome to week 22 of the FUT Weekly podcast, out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and of course, a bonus episode every week on Patreon. On this episode, we'll be talking about future stars and something that could be very strong on the horizon. In fact, on the horizon, we've got AirJapes, as we so often do. Welcome back to the FUT Weekly pod.
Hello, Ben. Happy to be back.
Well, I said I needed some energy for this podcast, but I wasn't expecting that much. Right, we can move on to our next guest, who is Richard Buckley, eWorld Cup commentator. Welcome back.
Hello, thank you as always for the invite back. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good to have you back. And we also have back, after he wasn't on last week, Josh, SpreadsheetFIFA, content expert, and someone I know loves a bit of the old hand egg, and so was probably enjoying some controversial Super Bowling on Sunday night.
I mean, it wasn't a great weekend for referees in both forms of football,
That's true,
for being
actually,
honest. By about half-time on the 3 p.m. kickoffs, we'd had 4 or 5 horrific decisions in the Premier League. And then we had an all-time classic Super Bowl last night, and then a little ticky-tack holding call on the far side.
Do you know what? Despite being over here, I'm already a bit lost. So do you want to explain to the listeners, if you can, just for the podcast, in football terms, as they say, what actually did happen?
It's kind of a tough one. In fact, it's not. It's kind of similar to the sending off in the Wolves game where Mario Lemina was the third player to arrive at the referee and got sent off. And I think it's officially been put down as aggressively running, which he wasn't doing. He was jogging at best. And it's that kind of like the referee's made a decision that he didn't need to make or that he wouldn't usually make in that situation.
Okay, right.
And when you haven't done it for nearly the entirety of the game. Now, I'll be fair, there were some calls that probably should have been made that the Eagles got away with, but when you've not made it the entire game, to essentially hand the game in with a minute to go to one of the teams, when you didn't need to make the call, it wasn't egregious, it wasn't an obvious foul, it wasn't clear and obvious. That was the kind of the bit that stuck.
Okay, yeah.
I would say, I'm pretty neutral in this one as well, although I did want to see the Chiefs win just because I'm sorry to anybody who's from Philly, but Philly can be pretty obnoxious. And I think the vast majority of neutrals would prefer not having to deal with a Philadelphia sports team winning a championship, of which they've lost 3 in the past 2 or 3 months now. They lost the MLS Cup, they lost the World Series, and now they've lost the Super Bowl. So unlucky. But I would say, well, 1, yay for a high-scoring Super Bowl. That was close. That's always more fun. 2, a lot's going to be made of that holding call at the end, but really, grabbing even a little bit of the receiver like that is, it's a bold call for the official to make. By the letter of the law, it would be a holding penalty, but it's also it's maybe a tricky one there. That's the nature of sports.
You need to make sure the deciding factor isn't the referee, right?
Well, and even if you have things like VAR, you might see a handball blocking a shot in the final minutes of the game and be like, nah, even when you review it. So
yeah.
I don't know about that Chelsea game or how that played out, but
I was actually going to say, I was that annoyed by the decision in the Super Bowl final. I won't be watching another NFL game until next year's Super Bowl final. And it's just, I can't believe it, really.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how much of that makes it into the final podcast. But either way, we should now get into FUT Future Stars. And it's been a slightly more interesting week, I would say. There's been some players we'll certainly be talking about, but there's also maybe not been the improvement people were hoping for in terms of the quality of content. And we'll come to right at the end what we think might be able to make that step up. But we haven't had Richard or Josh on throughout Future Stars, so it would be interesting to get your perspectives on it. There's certainly been a lot of feelings of disappointment, but at the same time, there's some exciting players in there for some people, I suppose. Josh, do you want to start us off with your thoughts?
It's an odd one. It definitely feels like a deliberate kind of reversal of the power curve a little bit, because there are obvious things they could do with almost every card they've released to make them that slight bit better, that they're just kind of almost refusing to do. I even go back to the Spanish cam that they gave Riquelme, that they gave 5-star skills to. Brilliant. But he's only got 80 stamina. So he's going to wear out by the end of the game. And it feels like with a lot of the cards, they've done that. And then you kind of get to the worst offender in terms of something like Jacob Ramsey, where they're 35 games or however many games it is that you need to play to get him, assuming you win all of your games and all of that. And the final card is a pretty similar card to Joe Willock, who's 28k on the market. And it's kind of like the reward for the time that you're putting in for the objectives doesn't seem to be totally there. That Nuno Tavares is interesting, but 50, 82 plus player picks that are an 82 rated squad. Now, I've seen some very good 82 plus player picks, and they do seem to be giving out decent fodder, but it's just kind of, I think it's got to be expected, right? You know, we have the biggest promo outside of Team of the Season, really, in Team of the Year, and then you're going to have a bit of a come down, but it does feel like they could have, I even look at that 𝘃𝗲𝗰𝗀𝘀 last night, make him 4-star. Like, I really don't think they should be releasing any player that isn't a centre-back or a goalkeeper with less than 4-star right now, because it really is such a detriment that I don't know who that card is for anymore.
To be fair, actually, we could swing into pound for pound because he was nominated, but we will get Richard's thoughts first. How have you found Future Stars? I know, actually, none of us really, unless Josh, did you get a cheeky Team of the Year before the end, actually?
No, it's the first year in like 3 that I haven't got one, so yeah.
There we go. Well, maybe that's a crumb of comfort for some listeners, but unfortunately, Richard, I don't think can comfort anyone. You did all right.
Yeah, I got 3 in the end. I managed to get Theo Hernandez untradeable, and then Van Dijk and Hakimi.
What, both tradable as well?
Tradable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Which are quite nice.
I'm assuming you've used all of them?
I have used all of them, yes.
Would you say they are easily the best of their position that you've used?
Hakimi, yes. Van Dijk, yes. Theo Hernandez, no. I don't know what it is about him. Hakimi was just so much better. Like, I found myself going down the right so much more than the left, using Hakimi more. But then also, with Hakimi being tradable, 2.3 million coins for a right back just seemed too good. So he got moved on in the recent uplift in the market, shall we say. Going back to Future Stars, I like the promo. I think there's a lot of positives in it. I do agree with what Josh was saying with sort of the stats being weird in a few of the items. I would love to see, just sort of from here on out in all the promos, you giving, for example, a Future Star, the icons, specifically the Future Stars buff as well, or whatever promo it is, just dropping like 6 or 7 icons in it with the promo. I think we were talking, 𝗲𝗍𝗄s, the last time I was on about the Team of the Year icons and then the World Cup icons. It just makes the promo a bit more lively. And I think you could have had some fun with this, with a Future Stars Michael Owen or a Future Stars Wayne Rooney when they were potentially really young, and it just gives a little bit more juice in the player picks, in the packs that we're opening. If you're doing the fodder packs, it just gives you that little bit more. A lot of the players right now, if you were to get a Future Star, don't necessarily go in your post Team of the Year team, which... What's the point of the promo if we can't improve our teams for the majority of the hardcore players who will be listening to this?
I don't want to talk about this too much because we did talk about it last week, but I think it remains the same situation that personally for my team, nothing we've had so far, even the SBCs or decent Team 2 players that we've seen, will actually make it into my team. Partly for chemistry reasons, I guess, but really the quality of the players, there aren't enough at that kind of tier, and my team's really good, but it's not like absolutely ridiculous. So I don't know, it is a bit of a shame from that perspective. And I assume, 𝗲𝗍𝗄s, apart from one player, that might not have changed for you.
I still can't afford 𝘵𝘆𝘐𝑚 unless I sell someone.
So
it's ultimately, I will put 𝘵𝘆𝘐𝘐 in the team eventually. It's not going to change though, because everybody's got junk reactions, man.
Yeah, it's interesting that. I mean, 𝘵𝘆𝘐𝑚 was okay, 89.
So I'll probably play him in the midfield, in which case I would put a Hawk on him, which is not going to boost his dribbling stats, of which are very, very good to begin with. But I found myself wondering, like, when I use him, his pace might be enough that I could get away putting a Maestro on him and getting his reactions to 97, where he then becomes like very elite. Though we know base reactions hit different than boosted reactions. It just seems to be the nature of the beast. I've also toyed around with like, well, should I try playing him as like a false 9 with marksman once I get him? I don't know.
Yeah, that's quite a nice boost.
Yeah, Hawk is my absolute preferred chemistry style for central midfielders. They're the two like box-to-box CMs in a 4-3-3. And, then you're not boosting that reactions at all. And so I'm like, all right, I've tried Maestro on midfielders before, but like maybe Musiala's, the 92 acceleration or whatever it is will be enough that, he feels spicy, but then, you're not getting a positioning boost or some of the other boosts. And kind of
he does at least have better stats than you'd think because he's got low free kick accuracy and things like that. So his face card stats don't look quite as good as they actually are in game. But I was wanting to move on to you, Richard. Any particular players in this squad that have taken your fancy so far?
So I was looking at the Enzo Fernandez because I was fortunate enough to get Koulibaly's honourable mention. Untradeable.
Yeah, the 𝘬𝘃𝗲𝗏 is great, isn't he?
Yeah,
I've been searching hard for 𝘵𝘃𝗃𝗏 over the sort of the last 2 weeks. I sort of missed the entirety of Team 1. I was in the process of moving house, so I had no internet. So I've been slaving away the last few days trying to get these tokens. I did this the 87 plus Winter Wildcard Future Teams Team 1. So granted, it's not a Team 2, but I did get Mudryk from that pick. So the Chelsea sort of style starting to come together. And Mudryk I do like, but I wouldn't have paid the price for him off the market. Like I'm in a very fortunate position. He's sort of like a player that is a luxury player. I'm very happy I've got him in, and he helps Koulibaly a lot. But I don't think for the price tag, I think he's still over 1 million coins. I just don't think he's worth that value. I would probably say maybe 400 to 500k potentially. A high pace, 5-star skill Premier League winger. But I think 1 million coins, you're sort of pushing it.
Yeah, no, I thought that looking at the stats. And actually, I was thinking for you, Josh, 𝗵𝘴 might be interesting as a Manchester United player, but 71 composure is just really, really low. 80 would still make him not the most composed, but 71 I think is making him pretty poor, despite that. I guess he's got good balance and things. But.
Yeah, it does just feel like they've done that with every player. There's something, as Japes pointed out, it's reactions on a lot of them. A lot of them have got 80 reactions, which just isn't going to cut it at this stage of the game. I have a soft spot for 𝘬𝘦𝘦𝘱 from Bilbao. He absolutely ran a Football Manager save a few years for me when he was still a young whippersnapper who was at the central midfield. Now he's kind of tearing it up going forward. So I kind of picked up his card just as I want to play with a player I've got some feeling for, and really liked him. 4'4", like 6'2". I was sad that they haven't given him more defensive stats, because although he is playing more attacking this year, he's still decent in the tackle. He presses really well. But I was quite surprised at him. I played him at Cam, and I really enjoyed a lot of kind of his body movements. Felt a little bit different to other players. He's high in average, which in the past has kind of been don't really like. It was the next worst one after 𝘵𝘃𝗏, and I actually really, really liked him. Like bundled people off the ball quite a lot. And then the Charles de Ketalaere SBC is the other one. That striker is an absolute machine. The closest thing to real life Erling Haaland that I've used in FIFA. He's not a finesse player. He's just pure pace and power. And yeah, it's quite a lot of fun when you set him on a run. There's not many defenders that can get in his way. But it's been kind of slim pickings really in that kind of mid-tier of card. They're either super cheap or they're ridiculously expensive for the card that they are. And I don't know if that's maybe like a coin liquidity problem in the game, because so many rewards are untradeable and so much has been pushed towards untradeable. I don't know if people are just running out of coins. I don't or maybe they've got too many of them. I don't know what the situation is.
I was actually thinking about this, and I think I do know what it might be, is that basically you've got kind of two tiers of player, or maybe a couple, but a lot of players are in a situation where they don't have many coins, particularly because they've been sinking any coins they've got into SBCs, things like that, and generally haven't maybe committed enough or have spent and the players have lost value, that kind of thing, which is quite common. So those players tend to shop around the 100, 200k market most, and maybe need a couple of players to complete their squads, and so need to spread those coins out. But there's a tier of player who has a really, really strong, and I think probably most of us, or a lot of committed players, are going to be in this category, where you've got an amazing squad of untradeable players and built up a strong coin total because they haven't had to spend on any particular players that they think are going to drop in price to fill out the squad. And that basically means that that tier can afford the more expensive players, and they've been inflated, and they're actually going in to buy those players after Team of the Year. The likes of 𝘵𝘚 are just players people really want to use, and they're willing to spend to use that player that they really want to use. So I think that's what is behind that. But anything else to add, Japes, on the squad?
I want to give one shout out to like one Future Stars player that I haven't used, but I think it looks interesting. Is that what is his? I don't know how to say his name. 𝗵𝘀𝗀𝘀𝘁, the Chelsea center back.
Yeah.
Because he has 95 reactions and 94 composure.
Yeah.
Same thing with 96 base strength. So, with the Shadow, he gets up to like 96 sprint speed. His acceleration is not great, but he is left-footed. And I kind of look at that card and I'm like, he's probably okay in game. I haven't played against him, but I'd be actually curious what his stats look like compared to like a gold Virgil van Dijk.
Probably not too dissimilar, actually. He has got pretty low agility and balance, but probably higher on other stats. I was going to say, should we do pound for pound? Because I feel like we're probably going to start to mention players that we would nominate.
Badiashile, that's mine. I'm
nominating
first.
Is that yours? I want to sneak in and nominate the striker Ketalaere, to be honest, because I was comparing his stats. People may have seen this on the 𝘭𝘪𝑔𝑔 Twitter account, but this is the 5-star weak foot version compared to the 3.8 million 𝘵𝘃𝗀𝘃𝗀𝘀. If you look at their stats, both with marksmen, I mean, I think you could argue Ketalaere's stats are better. He also has better defensive stats. Obviously, 𝘵𝘃𝗀𝘃𝗀𝘀 has 5-star skills, so if you prefer that, he's going to be better. But a lot of people will say, oh, but 𝘵𝘃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝘀, he's going to have that special sauce. Yes, okay, he probably does. But I still think Ketalaere is going to be, up there, and the 5-star weak foot for some people is going to help. So for 300k or something versus 3.8 million, I think, as Josh, you were saying, it's just fantastic value. And his base short passing and long passing are 91, which is just ridiculous for a player who's like a target man, essentially. He's going to be able to create much better than most, and also could even play, Cam. I think both versions of him, either player pick, could be used as one of your more attacking midfielders in a 3 pretty comfortably. I haven't done it yet because I'm not sure whether I'd actually use him that much, but I probably will do him just because I think he's pretty unique. I'm loath to pick the 5-star weak foot version because I'm such a 5-star skill merchant, but the 5-star weak foot one for me just is so much better. I don't know whether anyone would disagree with that, but I think the 5-star weak foot one is really, really good. Does anyone want to come in with, apologies if I nicked someone's, but does anyone want to come in with a pound for pound? Richard, for example?
It's a tough one because when you say pound for pound, as we were saying before, the best players are just not pound for pound worthy. Like they're just too expensive and it doesn't match up to how good they should be. So I'm going a little bit left wing. I'm going a little bit off the radar. I'm going for Carlos Vela, the SBC.
Okay.
I don't know when this came out. It might have been last week, but it might have been this week. He's just quite good. Like, I completed him. He gives me, I don't know what it is about him, but for like 40k, he just gives me the super sub that I needed. And I might be crazy, but sometimes I'll bring him on down the middle, 4-3-2-1, central striker. Why not? Come and strut your stuff, Carlos. But most of the time, he comes on as my more attacking central midfielder in the 4-3-2-1. So I'll have my 2 sitting or my 2 box-to-box, and then one who's sort of free roam-esque. And he's that player. I'm fully expecting no votes, but Carlos Vela, he's all right. And I think in a week where we've not got much value for coins, if in doubt, he's very, very cheap, 88 rated fodder as well.
Yeah.
If you're into that.
He is, definitely. And it's funny because I tweeted out when he came out from the 𝘭𝘪𝑔𝑔 account saying, this is the cheapest 88 rated out there probably, but he doesn't look particularly great in game. I sent the tweet and I was like, this sometimes happens. I bet I've cursed myself. And sure enough, it was a playoffs match, I think. The guy's team was not good. I was not particularly, I would say, switched on for this game. But anyway, Vela scored 4 goals and assisted 3 in the match. That moment's Vela. He's actually really good. And I think he's just one of those players. He's always been kind of good, whatever card he's had. There's something about him. He's kind of slippery. I agree. If people don't have many coins or need MLS chemistry, I guess.
𝘬𝘯𝘰𝗀𝘀.
Yeah, exactly.
𝘬𝘯𝘰𝗀𝘀 as well.
Yeah, I think he is a good player to use. Great. All right. I think that's a good nomination. So we had 𝗃𝗍, we had Richard. I've done mine. What about you, Josh? Who'd you go for?
I'm going to shout out an early this year pod favourite of 𝗃𝗍's, which is 𝘠𝘠 Flashback.
Yeah.
I really, really he was, he was the lengthy centre-back for me. He was the one that explained pace wasn't important, right back at the beginning of the game when 𝘬𝘮 was we were getting used to the fact that actually if you've got high sprint speed and are lengthy, it doesn't really matter what your acceleration is because you're going to end up with that sort of catch-up pace. And this is just a really solid card. I think he's got 88 base sprint speed in it, 6'4", like an absolute mountain. Especially when you're on attacking corners, if you can get him as your player that's running into it, he is very, very difficult to stop. He's got high 80s jumping base. I've been playing with an anchor, and that puts him up to 97 jumping. And it is quite funny because there are very few players that can compete with him. He's let down a little bit. His passing is really poor. But I think we're kind of entering the realm of fun players that kind of represent some element of value for the coins that you're putting in, rather than a player that's necessarily going to massively improve your team. This Smalling probably isn't going to massively improve your team, but he is a lot of fun to use. And if you want to sort of try out some Serie A people, then he's the one I would go for.
Yeah, I've got quite a few Serie A people actually, so I'm tempted to do him. Okay, he looks good. And also you get free 𝘭𝘬𝘀, which
I mean, come off it, the duo of dreams. I wish that the dynamic image was him crawling along the floor. Then that card would genuinely be goated at that point.
Yeah. I do feel like they have to be slightly careful about not taking the piss too much. Do you know what I mean? I think making a free 𝘭𝘬𝘀 within
Phil Smalling?
Phil Smalling?
Mike Smalling. I think you'll find.
Anyway, I think that wraps up pound for pound, apart from the listener suggestion. And this is actually quite a good one because I know you were saying earlier on, Josh, that you didn't think 𝘃𝗏𝗏 was especially great. Well, I think one of the things that he probably is good for is being a proper holding midfielder, actually. And A. says, I'm going to go for 𝘃𝗏𝗏 Thuram for pound. He has completely changed my team. I gave in during World Cup swaps to fodder packs instead of Vieira, and I've been constantly chasing to plug a hole in my CDM position. Since missing out on Vieira, I used Winter Wildcards Tonali, who was a beast, and then moved on to World Cup Alonso, but found him to be too slow and just didn't have much of a presence on the pitch. But now I have Thuram in the CDM position. I feel a lot more in control of games. I play him as the pivot in a 4-1-2-1-2 (2), and also as the stay-back CDM in a 4-2-3-1. And what surprised me the most about him is how quick he is in transition when playing those quick passes. He even managed to score 2 goals in one game just doing a late burst into the box. For extra points as well, he has the hair trait and looks like a cross between Vieira and Gullit in game. And he says, keep up the good work, guys. And looking at his stats, looking at him with a shadow, I think he would be a really, really good defensive midfielder. And he's also one of those players, and I think I'd be interested to know what other people think about this, but I've certainly started to now complete SBCs a bit more just because of the potential chemistry utility in the future, which in past cycles I probably wouldn't do, because I think the way chemistry worked meant you could be pretty sure who you probably end up using and who you wouldn't end up using, because you're looking at sort of cores in certain positions or around certain positions. And there was also just less content in the game generally, so you kind of were aware that probably you wouldn't get too many options to kind of shift away from what you were doing through untradeable players. And obviously you can go out and just buy players to fix chemistry issues if you want to, but with how important club links are this cycle, I think it is a bit different again, because you're kind of thinking, well, actually, I might not see another player from this club, which might help at some point. While his club isn't necessarily super useful, the French Ligue 1 defensive midfielder, I think is quite useful for me, so I might end up doing him. He's not super expensive either. That hasn't been mentioned here, but it's an 86 rated squad and the other's an 83, so it shouldn't be crazy expensive at all, or at least it's a good place to sink some fodder. So I think he's pretty good. In terms of other things that are around at the moment, you did mention earlier, Josh, the Nuno Tavares left back. And it's been one of those ones where when it came out, people worked out the cost, and to complete all those upgrade SBCs you need to do to get to the 88, I think people are saying it's about 450k or something like that, maybe even 500. But
Yeah.
I've also seen a lot of people packing far more in value from those player picks that you have to do than that value. So I don't know. Are we saying that there is, if you're going to do or want to do player picks and want to kind of get one of the future stars squad untradeable or something, that it is actually worth putting coins into?
I mean, here's my frustration with it, right? The biggest issue I found during Team of the Year was that between the sort of first weekend of full release and the Friday where they went out of packs, there were very few places to consistently put 82, 83, and 84 rated cards. Most of the SBCs that were being released were like starting off at 85. And so you kind of 84s almost became like discard duplicates at that point. And this idea of going, okay, here's an upgrade pick SBC that's probably too expensive on its own. Like, it's decent, but, you know, an 82 rated squad to get one 82 rated plus player back seems a little steep compared to some of the other upgrades. But it would have been perfect during Team of the Year. So the fact we've got it now is a little bit frustrating, but I do like it as a kind of, I'd like if we had one of these a month. Here's an upgrade SBC that's going to be here for the whole month, and you can slowly chip away at it with, you know, duplicate cards that you end up having and just throw a few things in there, and then you get a pick, and you might, you know, just want to put the pick straight back into the next pick, but you're slowly making your way towards this card. I really like it as a concept. I do think that taking it's 500k for an 88 rated left back, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. It's just more about timing. I don't know how many people are kind of grinding 50, 82 plus player picks just like, while they've still got that hangover from Team of the Year kind of thing. But it's a cool concept that I hope is worked on and we see more of.
Yeah, and also I guess, you know, you don't have to go all the way. So if you want to get one of the other versions just to kind of, I don't know, future-proof yourself, I don't think the 86 is hugely worse than the 88, actually. He's weird, though, isn't he? Because I was looking at what chemistry style to use, and because he's got 83 short passing, this is the 88 version of Nuno Tavares, and 70 long passing, you kind of have to boost the passing, because that's going to be a liability, I think. Also, in-game, you know, his actual rating, he might say 88 on the card, but he's only an 84, which is quite a lot lower. And I think that's probably partly because of his passing, because his ability on the ball is pretty good. Otherwise, you know, his dribbling stats. And physically, he's good. Defensive stats aren't great either. So with the fact that his pace, I would say, isn't high enough for fullback without a boost, you're in this awkward spot where you kind of need to boost pace, defending, and passing, which you can't do with the chemistry style. So he's a little bit awkward. Like I would say, yeah, if you want to do lots of picks, then unlock him and he'll be useful. But I just don't think he's necessarily someone that people should be going out to complete, if you like.
I do enjoy the confidence of them giving him left mid and left wing as alternative positions. Like, anybody's looking at that card and going, he's going to absolutely kill it at left wing. Like, no.
He's got 51 finishing, doesn't he? Which is just crazy low. So it's really fullback or nothing for him. And maybe you could argue it gives a bit more flexibility in terms of starting formations. And if you wanted to move a fullback forward, of course, into your midfield, and you can move him to left back, then that's potentially an option. I guess that's nice. So that is one small bonus. But the problem is that his stats are not versatile enough to play elsewhere. And I think the good thing maybe about this is it's a bonus if you wanted to do those player picks. If you really want to get a first owner future stars, then, you know, this will be a good thing for you. But like many future stars, he just suffers from certain issues with particular stats. And it feels like they've really gone for a promo where it's like, right, as you said, Josh, actually, let's not increase the power curve. Let's step it back, if anything, because we know we can make appealing, hyped players without actually pushing that power curve onwards. And the other thing that's interesting is I think to do that, they've had to use almost older players than they would have used for future stars previously. Players who have some previous hype rather than are necessarily players who people don't particularly know much about, but because their stats are so good and so improved, that kind of brings the hype. Because Nuno Tavares, for example, is 23. A lot of these future stars are 23. Quite a few are 22, 21. There are actually very few teenagers, which isn't really something you'd associate with future stars, I'd say. I feel like the stars have become increasingly established stars over time, but that certainly feels the case with this squad. And even the ones that aren't established or not very well known are older. Kind of makes me think maybe we'll get a future stars, perhaps even at some point. But yeah, it is a bit of a strange one, Richard.
You wouldn't say future stars, you'd say young stars. Enzo Fernandez isn't future. He won a World Cup. He won Young Player of the Year, Young World Cup player. A lot of these players are either starting for their club, big internationals, or regarded as some of the best talents in the world. So to me, future stars, you can have a couple of these big players, but someone I'm just trying to think, Charlie Patino from Arsenal on loan, or Dane Scarlett, the Spurs youngster, players who are actual future stars who could be the stars of the future. I don't know. It's a strange one, but
it's funny because, how many appearances does 𝘵 have at this point?
He must be kicking on for 100
Nearly, yeah.
appearances.
And I was
He
just
must be
thinking,
getting close.
This is not a future star. This is a current star, really. There are only 20 goalkeepers playing regularly in the Premier League. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? And that's fine, but I just feel like the real fun of the first ever future stars was players like, Foden, who's, I guess his base card was a silver at the time, right? And he wasn't playing regularly. You think of some of the other players who got special items. I think Trent was in there, Militao, he was a gold, but I think he was very, very low rated gold at the time. Sancho was probably not really playing for Dortmund at that point, I would say. I do feel like it's kind of interesting. It doesn't quite feel like it did in past cycles. And maybe there's a financial element because these players are going to sell more packs than unknowns, maybe.
There's just weird choices all over the place. Elanga instead of Garnacho. Elanga was a future star maybe 2 years ago when he was supposedly United's saviour, as the chant went. And maybe Garnacho falls into that. He's a current star. But he's more of a sub player that's coming on and he's doing well and he's only 18. He's got plenty of time to fall off yet. What I do find weird when I look at future stars is how consistent EA's hit rate is. There are very few future stars that haven't made it. The worst example, I think, is Patrick Cutrone, who is currently in Como in Serie B, having kind of moved to Wolves and not done anything there after being at Milan. And he may still be on loan, but they really absolutely smashed it from 19, 20, 21. It's a lot easier to smash it when you're choosing players who are, as Rich said, winning, young player of the World Cup. I think if you're picking players from some of the major clubs in world football and saying these are the future stars and they're playing for them already, you're kind of cheating a little bit. Charlie Patino Blackpool card would be hilarious. He would be difficult to use, but that's maybe where make advantage of the fact that the chemistry system this year, you get base stats. Make him a 91, 92 rated because no one's really going to be able to get him on chem without sacrificing elsewhere in the team. Let's actually go out and find some gems that may not make it. It's much more fun to go, hang on, who is this guy? So you can check his progression out over a number of years. I don't know. But Burkhardt maybe from Mainz. I'm sure not many people have heard of him. I know Bayern are interested in him, but that is that kind of player I want to see more of. But his base is a gold, so I don't know. The other thing I want to pick up on when Team 2 came out, I saw a couple of comments going, it's always the same players. And I actually decided to have a look at Team 2, and not a single player in Team 2 has had more than one special card that isn't performance-based in previous FIFAs or this year. So whilst we do have a second Plata this year, the is Ecuadorian right mid, there are a lot of them. This is their first proper special card in the game that isn't an inform or a team of the season. So this isn't recycling of a lot of content, but it does feel like, we know 𝘭𝑪 is probably going to be in team of the season, so we don't need a 90 rated version of him. Let's find somebody else. So I do kind of get that side of it, but packs aren't going to sell themselves, are they, unfortunately?
Well, that is the thing. And some of these players, the more hyped ones, aren't actually in the game. So I don't know whether there's a limitation. If you look at Garnacho, for example, he's not in the FUT database.
No,
some kind of limitation in terms of what they can do there. Although they do add players during the cycle into the database. So that's not completely unreasonable. We can hold out some hope for a future stars, Garnacho perhaps. But in terms of future stars, it perhaps hasn't had the impact on the market that many players were kind of hoping for in terms of dipping the prices of players, but that's something I think we'll talk about in a second, something that might make the difference. And I was interested to know from yourself, Richard, in terms of the market, obviously we saw a bit of a rise. You mentioned the fact that you've sold some players as a result of that. And is that because you see a dip in the future in terms of the market? I guess you probably don't need to be too concerned with the amount of coins you've got, but are you going to be looking to spend those coins if there is a bit of a dip?
I'm a bit of a fiend for, I think the quotation marks are the gamble SBCs, the icon or whatever it may be. I do like having a spin on them. But yeah, I think unless I was to go out and buy a Prime R9 or a Ruud Gullit or a Team the 𝘵esse or something like that, like there's not a lot for me to potentially go out and buy. The only player who I was looking at was Enzo, but yeah, I think I'm sat on like 8 mil from selling the Team of the Years.
Jeez.
So
yeah, that's
in a nice place.
Yeah. And then Josh, in terms of what you expect to happen, I mean, I think people who know the market have been saying, oh yeah, it will drop. It's been quite a while since Team of the Year. Well, 2 weeks, I suppose. Do you think we're still in for a near-term drop? I think the thing that I said on last week's podcast is, look, if you really want a player, then it might be an idea to buy them now if you have the coins, because ultimately when they drop, they may not be nearly as good as they are now in terms of their relative quality compared to the rest of the database or the players they're coming up against, right? So that is important to kind of think about. But, how long are people going to be waiting for the market to dip? And I guess it could be as soon as the next promo if it's a really good one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some leaks of what the next promo is going to be. I won't mention it, but it's one that tends to have some good cards, but not until further into the season. And so I don't know if that's necessarily going to push the prices down. It feels like we're potentially approaching a bit more of that weekly prices rise going into sort of Friday and then drop over the weekend. If you look at the high rated cards, they kind of peaked on Friday and they do seem to have dropped kind of 5 to 10% since the weekend. So there's a potential that we see a drop into next week. And it's whether that's going to continue or it goes back up again for next weekend. So the thing to always remember is that your card is unlikely to get massively devalued by anything other than the market just dropping in general. And so if the market as a whole comes down, then you've not really lost anything because you've still relatively got the same number of coins if we're pricing everything at the same amount. So don't make the mistake I did a few years ago of finishing the game with 6.5 million coins unspent and not having built your best team because you're waiting for the price to come down, because eventually you'll kind of lose interest. Use those coins, have some fun. And I think in general, the market is probably not going to rise too much more from here towards Team of the Season and generally does quite a kind of slow decline now as we get towards Team of the Season. So, more cards should become available for cheaper as time goes on, but I just have your fun where you can find it now in the game, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I know you said you wouldn't say what the next thing is, but I mean, it's not too hard to speculate about what that might be, right? Because
something starts this week that,
Well, actually, I guess as people are listening to this even, and actually, there may even be a splash screen to look out for, but people are obviously going to be interested in the Champions League and you tend to get some live items. The thing that I was going to say, which is quite interesting, is when we saw Path to Glory, and Japes, I remember talking about this on the podcast plenty, Path to Glory was actually quite cheap in the first few weeks that it came out, and then it shot up, and we had things like Bruno Guimaraes going up crazy amounts, even before, well, not before games were played, but as the first games were being played, those prices rose a lot. And so it was interesting, and I was wondering, Japes, whether you think from EA's perspective, this is their reasoning. They're obviously doing this road to the final, if they're doing exactly that, something like that, around the time of the Champions League actually happening. And I guess that will mean that these players are going to be more desirable to people opening packs and around the time they're released, because the Champions League is like happening at that moment that they're in packs. So I thought it was interesting, Japes. Maybe it's deliberate, maybe it's just scheduling, I guess.
I mean, I think throughout the history of foot, we've seen that like when it's a big match and you see, I don't know, I'll take United, like Rashford scores an important goal, Rashford's price on the market goes up.
Yeah.
Releasing promo cards like around that time means that people are going to go out to the market and want the top rated version of that card, which is probably the new promo card. And if he's too expensive on the market, they're going to be like, well, maybe I'll just toss some money at some packs and see if I can't pack him. So I mean, I would say it's like 100%. It's also like good for the community. Like, it's relevant content because Champions League is back, and that's exciting. So it's really kind of a win-win on both sides.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess, Josh, is there anything to kind of read into that from a market perspective in terms of getting them cheaper? Or because obviously that was great in part of the glory because you could pick up these players relatively cheap, and then they ended up just rising. Whereas that, I guess, might not be the case here so much.
Yeah. I would compare potential upgrades to like for like cards on the market. Try and find the most similar card. There were prices where you knew even if that player won the tournament and got the full upgrade, they were never going to hold the value that they were at. The speculation is always bigger usually than that final price. So
you sell into the hype.
Exactly. That's the phrase. Sell into the hype if you're looking to invest. And if you're looking to buy a player and you just love that player and you want that team to do well, buy them early. Just go on the ride with them. And then, if you panic, sell. So that's what I would say. I'll be interested to see how they do the upgrades. Are they going to do the +1s, or are they going to go off the new upgrade team of the weeks, where we're getting these +2s now, because they could start off very cheap and like very low rated, but have potential to get insane by the end because it's double upgrades every time. That might be something to look at, but I imagine they're going to be high rated because no one wants to pack an 84.
This is pure speculation and also using some knowledge, but it's the Champions League tournament this upcoming weekend. It's the group stages of it. For that particular esports event, you're only allowed to use 3 icons/heroes or Champions League items. So I think that the items released would suggest that these are going to be... Because at the minute, there's no real good... Like, we got 𝘵ci, I think there's a 𝘪𝑗𝑚𝑒, but there's not a lot of, like, event-level meta Champions League items. So I think we might get some very, very good Champions League players coming this weekend.
Cue the panic. Don't buy now. Ignore what we were saying. Wait. But no, that's actually a really good, interesting point there. So we'll see. And actually it's interesting because if they made them high rated, there isn't that much room for them to improve. I mean, that's the flip side, right? So I guess you're looking at the 5-star weak foot, 5-star skills, maybe the traits and things. Obviously they've been adding more traits and we talked about that. So interesting stuff. Well, an interesting podcast, and thank you very much to our guests here. We'll start off with you, Josh. Actually, predictions for Barcelona, Manchester United before we go.
Oh, don't do that to me. Phil Jones is going to get a surprise start and he's going to wipe the floor with Barcelona. He's going to fulfill the potential he was bought for. He's going to be the next Brian Robson. So that's my prediction for United. Now, I think it's going to be... I think we're going to get beaten. I don't think we've necessarily been that good. We've been grinding out results, and I think Barcelona just are a bit too techie in that midfield for a kind of... We're going to not have Lisandro Martinez. That's going to be quite a big miss.
Oh yeah, he's suspended, isn't he?
Yeah. So I imagine probably a 1 or 2 goal win over the kind of aggregate score. But I think there'll be fun games to watch.
Yeah, mad to think. Wasn't it Phil Jones who played, I don't know, defensive midfield against 𝘵ci 10 years ago or something? Champions League final. I think it was. Maybe you can.
It was him or Darren Fletcher.
Yeah. Actually, maybe it was Darren Fletcher, but he was definitely in the squad. Right. Thank you very much to you, Josh. Appreciate you coming on. Are you doing any more streams post Team of the Year, or is that on pause?
Yes, I will be once this stinking cold clears itself up. So I apologise if you've been disgusted by my nasally voice today.
Yeah, not too bad.
But yes, I'll be back streaming fairly shortly. Yeah. On SpreadsheetFIFA. That's nice. Plug. You've got to remember to plug. I'm a bit hazy. I probably spoke way too much. So
it's always good. And we say goodbye to our next 2 guests who are actually going to be joining us on the Gameplay Pod anyway. We've got Ivan, Dr. Nightwatch, on that podcast this week. It's a supporter episode. He's going to be taking us through his 3-4-2-1 pro tactics, which he was using for quite some time and says are very much worth using. So I look forward to that. You can catch that along with every bonus podcast, an extra episode every week on the Patreon for just £3 a month. You can support via the link in the description of this podcast, or you can go to bit.ly/morepod or search support for weekly. It would be a real pleasure to have your support, and you'll get plenty in return. But yeah, thank you very much for now, Richard Buckley.
Thank you very much. You can catch me on all social media at @𝘅𝑒𝘚98, and also see if my prediction came right this weekend and we do get some big Champions League items, because I'll be there Saturday, Sunday, for the E-Champions League group stages.
Nice. And then finally, Japes, great as always to have you on. Glad you finally got your Musiala. I'm sorry, it's slightly more expensive than you'd hoped, but...
They say, what is it, good things come to those who wait, or however that expression goes. So I am hoping for good things performance-wise when I finally get him into my squad. And I could just sell some cards and get him now, but the cards that I'd have to sell I really like, and that's just like a whole different cup of tea. So I am happy that he's out there, and I'll absolutely pick him up, but he will get a team of the season card, and that card should be outrageous. So I'm going to just continue hyping him up. He's phenomenal. Like, he's truly phenomenal in real life. I don't know about FIFA yet, but if you guys want more from me, you can always check out my newsletter. That is Substack or p2psnacks.substack.com.
Nice. And I should say as well, you can subscribe to the podcast via the various podcast platforms, of course, if you would like these podcasts directly into your feed. And if you're catching this pod on YouTube, then please do subscribe on there too. Leave a like, drop a comment, all those good things that people say really help. And they seem to be actually at the moment, which is great. And finally, a huge, huge thank you to all those supporters, including those icon patrons: Dave B, 𝘭𝘪𝘬𝘦, Coach Vass, DJ FIFA Player, Alan G, Alistair, Anthony R, Dominic P, Rob P, Jeff B, Stephen F, Tom B, Damon H, David S, Nick Jack M, Eric T, Neil P, Adam G, Dan W, Waterman, Jake G, Roger D, Springford, Elec, Bracco, Nishant, Harry P, Alex M, Lee A, Brendan W, Andrew C, Joe W, Timothy J, Dylan, Adam R, Sam K, Graham W, Andy, Ads H2K, and Brian V. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add, though. FIFA's a bit like life, really. It has its many ups and its many downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now,